Hello, we are running in the last week of this course on interaction design. In our last session, if you remember, we had spoken about design framework. We have seen that how there are three components of this framework. The first one being the interaction design framework, second one being the visual design framework, and the third one being the industrial design framework. Amongst these, in the last session, we have paid attention to interaction design framework. Let us do a quick recap of interaction design framework in terms of different concepts and ideas that we have studied in the last session. So, we had tried defining a design framework. Within that, as I was saying, interaction framework. We began by defining the form factor details, which was about the platform to be used to host the interactive application. Then we were also defining posture and system input methods. And as you can recall, posture is the behavioral stance that the interactive product takes. Then we went on to detailing data and functional elements. Once those elements were detailed, we grouped them and sought hierarchies across those elements. So, detailing functional groups and their hierarchies was the next thing that we did. We then sketched the interaction framework and we detailed key path scenarios. And we attempted to validate interaction framework by the use of alternate scenarios. So, today we are going to look at visual design framework. As you would have noticed that this is a sequential process, and in this sequence the first activity that we accomplished was detailing the interaction design framework, then the visual design framework, and then the industrial design framework. So, you can imagine that by the end of interaction design framework, we had a detailed interaction sketch. And if you can recall the earlier session, we had said very precisely about sketching the interaction framework. So, if you have any confusion, I would encourage you to go back into the earlier video session and specifically look into the slides which have details about sketching the interaction framework. And now you would wonder why you would need a visual design framework. If you see the interaction framework, you would come to realize that we cannot really use an interaction framework because it is mostly devoid of experience attributes. It is devoid of font, it is devoid of color, it is devoid of the identity of the company that is producing those interactive artifacts. All of these various things the interaction framework is devoid of. What it has is the core essential details about the interactions which have to be accomplished. So, it is important to bring someone like a visual designer and accomplish the part which is left to make a holistic product. In that sense, if you see, there are essentially three different responsibilities of a visual designer. So, these three responsibilities, we are listing them on your slide now. A visual designer is responsible for detailing the experience attributes, and then once those experience attributes are detailed, then it is his responsibility to move on to the next step, which is developing the visual language. And once he has developed the visual language, then he has to apply that visual language onto already existing interaction framework or layouts of different screens of that interactive product. So, let us see what these experience attributes are. If you look at your screen, you would find that these experience attributes are basically a set of adjectives which can be used to indicate the tone, voice, and brand promise of the product. Okay, so maybe a product is more about elegance, or maybe it is about being sporty, maybe it is about a professional look, or a contemporary look, or it kind of gives you an idea about being competitive with other products. So, all these different adjectives, they would constitute what we call the experience attribute. And we have to, while we are doing this part, while a visual designer is involved in detailing these experience attributes, he has to constantly stay in touch with other stakeholders, mostly the people who have commissioned the project and the company which is involved in designing and developing a particular interactive artifact. So, it is imperative, it is very essential for the visual designer to stay in touch with different stakeholders, because it is his responsibility to reflect the different vision of these stakeholders in terms of brand identities, in terms of already established family resemblance, and different other things which constitute the overall experience of the product. And he is often required to review qualitative data and check if it can be used to extract experience attributes. And that is why it is very important to have a sense of the content of the earlier sessions, because if you could remember when we were talking about the qualitative research part, when we were talking about user interviews, customer interviews, stakeholder interviews, you might have a rich qualitative data which gives you a sense of these adjectives, which are about the experience that the interactive product delivers to its user. So, as a visual designer, it is very important for you to also look at that qualitative data, because it may have important cues about the experience that the interactive product should deliver. And once again, check back with stakeholders, and if you have sufficient confidence in terms of these experience attributes, then you can go ahead and finalize those attributes. And these attributes are often, this number is 3 to 5. So, as a visual designer, you can keep a set of adjectives or a set of keywords which qualify to be called as experience attributes. Let me show you a few pictures which are kind of delivering you a sense of elegance. Okay? So, visual designers often get involved into finding images which indicate or signify in some way the particular adjective that they are looking for. So, assume that the adjective for the particular images which you are seeing on your screen is elegance. So, a visual designer creates a mood board which has a juxtaposed images with that particular adjective in mind. So, all of these images, if you see, they give you a sense of elegance. There is a good foreground, background. There is a bit of beauty in these images, and and the quality of being elegant is so profound here. So, that is one of the mood board which is indicating or signifies the quality of being elegant. Contrary to it, you see the other mood board which is about being cluttered. So, if you see all of these images, they convey a sense of a cluttered world around you. So, a visual designer, basically he is interested in the visual language. He is interested in breaking these adjectives into different set of qualities and different set of attributes that can be used further to bring color, font, and different other visual attributes into the design of the interactive artifact. And as I had put, that mood board is one such exercise which is often a very important tool for a visual designer. So, once he has detailed enough and he has gathered a good knowledge of the competition, he has verified with stakeholders, he has gone through the qualitative data to kind of finalize the experience attributes, once again the set of adjectives which define the tone, voice, and brand identity of the product. Once he has finalized those, then it is the time for him to begin detailing the visual language. And when it comes to visual language, you would find that it really affects in terms of what users feel, in terms of what they understand, and in terms of what actions that they take. And it is not that difficult a concept to understand, because if you have looked at your own history of using interactive product, you would find that your experience with products which have a nice visual design is a better experience than with the products which had maybe an optimal visual design, or maybe visual design which doesn't suit your taste. So a visual design naturally is going to affect the way users feel, they understand, and the actions that they take. And when you are thinking about the visual language, you have to think of the visual treatments. So what are these visual treatments? What are these small tools in the hands of visual designers which are at his disposal to bring different feelings in that design? So these tools, you can imagine color being a very big differentiating factor. Use of lines, use of fonts and typography, use of icons, grids, layouts, material properties, something that looks like either a glossy finish or something that has a glass finish to itself, that's a material property, or something that has a matte finish to itself, that's a material property. And the general look and feel of the entire application, of the entire interactive product. So these are different visual treatments that a visual designer must detail when it comes to designing the visual framework of an interactive product. And once he has detailed those visual treatment, it is the third step, it is the third sequential and most logical steps to apply those visual treatments onto the already existing layouts and already existing interaction frameworks in the form of different screens of the interactive product. And often it is required to keep iterations in place and keep refining on your visual design and its application onto different screens of an interactive product. So refinement through iterations is a established process even with a visual design framework. And I am going to show you a few different visual designs in the slides to continue to have these points, to have a clarity on these points. So when it comes to typography and fonts, as you can see on your screen, there are all different possibilities. There are so many different possibilities of writing a simple message like welcome to interaction design once again. And do you realize that we are in the 4th week of this course? So by means of this message, we are trying to convey a certain emotion to the audience, and in this case you are the audience of this course. So if you can read across these several different ways of saying this message, you will feel that fonts also help convey different emotions, and in all different examples that you see in front of you, that emotion gets conveyed differently. Somewhere it is very structured, somewhere it is very friendly, somewhere it is very elegant, somewhere it is very professional. So these are all different ways you can say the same message, okay? You can communicate the same message, okay? So fonts and typography play a huge role in conveying the message to its intended audience. And once again, when it comes to visual design language, apart from fonts and typography, icons are playing a major role. So it is also the responsibility of the visual designer to detail these icons. And look at the way each and every product that is introduced new falls into a family of already existing set of products. So that is also a responsibility of the visual designer to make sure that every new product, every new interactive product that gets introduced before the users fall in line with the rest of the members of the family. And you can see a very explicit layout in this example. So there is a web page in front of you, but if you can imagine there is an underlined grid here, and that grid is a responsibility of the visual designer. As a graphic designer, as a visual designer, you have to, mostly that is one of the basic things that people begin with. So laying out a grid first and then setting out stage for rest of the elements in terms of their experience attributes is a visual design framework detailing job. Here also you can see a very explicit layout in place. So that again is an example for a layout. And once again, layout is so common across all visual designs, and I'm sure that once you have this understanding, you yourself can see those layouts in front of you. And now the next activity that we are embarking on is the industrial design framework. Once again, let me take you back to the entire sequence of steps. We had the interaction design framework, where the output of that framework was those sketches that detailed the very core elements and very essential elements of interactions involving the functional elements and the data elements. Then we had moved on to the visual design part, where we were detailing the experience attributes, the visual language, and applying it onto different screens. Now it might happen that at many a times, like if you can imagine a label printer, and you can search for this particular keyword, you would see that a label printer is not just made of it's not just a simple interactive product. It has got visual design to itself. It has got an industrial design to itself. And there would be so many of these products which would require an industrial design. So whenever there is a requirement of an industrial design in the interactive product, then at that point of time, you are also required to bring in another expert into the team who is an industrial designer. And this industrial designer, just like the visual designer and the interaction designer, his job would be to work with the design team to evolve effective form factor, okay? Say shape, size, dimensions, how many different ways you can put different controls onto that particular product. So all these details about the form factor and the input methods, it is the responsibility of the industrial designer, and he would do it in the most usual way in consultation, in perfect symphony with the rest of the design team. So he works with design team to evolve effective form factor and input methods, and he would develop prototypes and form language, just like we had a visual designer detailing treatments and visual language. We had industrial designer detailing prototypes and the form language. And the last responsibility of the industrial designer would be to apply that form language back onto the product. So since this is not the main scope of this course, I am going to limit our discussion on visual design framework and industrial design framework, but I am going to show you a few more examples of industrial design framework. Now if you see here, the industrial designer is trying to come up with a form factor and input methods for a handheld device, and you can see that he is trying out all different perspectives of looking at this device, how it would look in the front view, how it would look at the top view, and in the perspective view. So he's trying to detail out all different ways an interactive product could be imagined, or rather the form of this interactive product could be imagined. That's the responsibility of the industrial designer. Once again on your screen, if you see that this product is getting under refinement and iterative design process. So he is also iterating on his initial ideas, he is refining his initial ideas, and he is modifying his ideas to suit the product objectives. Here also you can see that he is trying to then see how do different things fit. All of this, imagining all of this, is the responsibility of the interaction designer. So once we have studied the interaction design framework and then followed it with visual design framework and is an industrial design framework, we have seen a holistic understanding of detailing the design framework. And that is where we are across the very last stage of the goal-directed design process. It is now the time for all of us to understand that there exists a set of design standards, principles, guidelines and style guides which have to be used by the designers across different stages of goal-directed design process. So let us start paying attention to these standards, guidelines and principles. First, let us take a look at design standards. What are these and what are the common examples of these design standards? So, interface design standard is an agreed upon and well accepted principle or an approach. So, there is a community of interaction designers, visual designers, researchers and people in academia who are agreeing on a certain set of conventions and rules and guidelines, principles and approaches is what we call an interface design standard. So, it focuses on different aspects of user interface design and interaction design. To give you a sense of what these aspects could be, so process of designing. So, we have a set of standards which talk about especially about the process of designing. Then there is another group of standards which talk about how do we evaluate our design. So, there is a process of evaluation. Then there is another set of standards which would talk about the design and development of interaction and visual framework. And then there would also be another set of standards which focuses on very essential but specific topics like ease of use, accessibility, cross-cultural use of different interactive products and so on and so forth. So, you see that these standards are once again they are well agreed upon and well accepted set of guidelines, principles or approaches by people in the community involving designers, researchers, academicians, industry experts and others. So, they help evolving policies when it comes to designing interactive products. So, that is one of the main functions of having a design standard. It is meant to be used by the designers and others involved in the design of interactive artifacts. And once you have once you have been involved in a process of designing interactive artifact, it is always a good idea to kind of have an understanding of these standards. So, one of the essential activities that you would be performing is to identify these standards. Now, once you have identified the relevant standards which match your goal as a designer in designing the interactive product, then it is the time to interpret those standards, apply them into your process, apply them into the design of the interactive product. So, you have to interpret those standards. And you do this interpretation based on a specific context of use and other circumstances involving the interactive product and its user. Never forget the part of the first few initial parts of this goal-directed design process. They were about knowing the user, the research phase, knowing the stakeholders, knowing the domain, knowing the task. And then there was a part about knowing the requirements, and requirements helped us move further into the framework design phase. So, even when you are into the framework detail phase, you need to keep the knowledge that you have gathered in the earlier phase, which is all the circumstances and situations and conditions which deal with the use and deployment of interactive product across different user groups. So you identify the design standard and then you interpret it according to the knowledge that you have gathered across different stages of the goal-directed design process. One of the very interesting repository of all these standards is the International Organization for Standardization. And if you can just use the string, which is user interface, and search using that string, you will find that there is an enormous resource in terms of standards just on user interface. You use the other string, the interaction design, you would find other set of very relevant standards. So I would like to encourage you hugely to look for yourself and explore this repository of International Organization for Standardization. In the slides to continue, I will give you few different examples of how these standards are written, how do you find them, and how do you interpret them. Okay. So let us look into the first example in the standards category. We have the standard known as ISO 9241-210:2010. It was adopted in March 2010. And the standard says ergonomics of human system interaction, and it is the part 210. Whatever is there after the hyphen is the part. So it's an interesting thing that you need to remember that often these standards are multi-part standards, as if they are explained or categorized across different sections. So whatever number comes after the hyphen is usually the identity of the part of that standard. So ISO 9241 is ISO standard which was adopted in March 2010. So in front of you is an example of one such revision. This ISO standard 13407 got revised as ISO 9241, and there is a revision document that is available for us to see. Now let us read this standard, how it is written, how it is explained before, how it is explained in the public repository of ISO. So ISO 9241-210:2010 provides requirements and recommendations for human-centered design principles and activities throughout the life cycle of computer-based interactive systems. It is intended to be used by those managing design processes and is concerned with ways in which both hardware and software components of interactive systems can enhance human system interaction. So this is how usually you would find an ISO standard detailed in a public repository. So once again, you have to identify every such standard and use it, apply it back into the design process that you are following. That is what we are calling the interpretation. So you remember, identify the standard, interpret it to suit the design process, to suit the interactive product you are following. But if you follow standards, it helps resolving a lot of conflicts. One other example, ISO 14915:2002, it is titled as Software Ergonomics for Multimedia User Interfaces. Once again, it is a multi-part standard proposing guidelines with respect to the design of multimedia user interfaces. So following are the parts of this ISO standard. We have part 1, part 2 and part 3, and they are slightly different from each other. The first part is design principles and framework. The second part is multimedia navigation and control. And the third part is media selection and combination. So these standards once again are responding to the contemporary needs of the community and of the technology and of the users. So 2002, if you remember, was the time when there are a lot of multimedia products which were coming to the market, like CD players, a lot of these media players, other kind of multimedia products. So at that time, this standard was proposed to bring consistency in the design of different interactive products. ISO 20282 is about ease of operation of everyday products. It's also a 4-part standard suggesting guidelines with respect to design of easy to operate everyday products. Now, ease of operation is, as you would see in the next few slides, that it is an important part of usability of the interactive product. How easy is the product for users to use is an aspect and a concern for usability. And ease of operation is concerned with the user's characteristics and context of use. Once again, never lose the connections with the earlier done processes in the goal-directed design process. Research, modeling, requirement. So that's where they come every time in the next stages. So we are into the stage of framework definition and detailing. And once again, we have users' characteristics and context of use coming up. Now, after design standards comes the style guides. Now, they provide the basic design rule or conventions, and you would see how they are different. They are more specific than a design standard. Okay, so they provide the basic design rule or convention, and they are applicable for a specific product or for a family of products. And we would soon see an example of this kind. Public proposals from a single organization or company for use by community members. So often there are companies and there are organizations which detail out a style guide, and then they make it available for developers who develop things on their own, for designers who design on a very freelance basis. They make those style guides available for all, so that there is a consistency in the design product or a family of product. A style guide typically describes all the required interaction styles and interface controls. Remember the point when we were saying detail, data and functional elements. So those interaction styles and interface controls, a description of those is usually captured in a style guide. And it describes not just what these interaction styles and interface controls are, it also describes when to use. So conditions for use of these interface controls and interaction styles. And not just conditions of use, it also illustrates different examples of how these given interaction styles or interface controls are being used. So there is an illustration in terms of use and use context. And not just that, it often had representative screen templates so that designers or anyone else set out to design an interactive product could pick up those templates and design interactive product accordingly. Now there are two kinds of style guides. The first one is commercial style guide. Now this one is highly specific and detailed in terms of telling about the design conventions or rules, and there is a lesser room for interpretation or translation by the designer. This is one point where a style guide differs from a design standard. Okay, a design standard it has got a room for the designers to interpret it. But in a style sheet, since it is highly specific and detailed and consider very unique and easily distinguishable interface styles and user interface controls, so there is a very less room for interpretation by the designer or anyone set out to design an interactive product. And it is applicable to a particular system or class of systems. This might sound a little difficult to understand, but look at the examples which are coming next. So when we were saying that it is a public repository hosted by an organization or a company for use by the members of the community, developers and freelance designers, and anyone else who set out to design an interactive product. So one such example is the Android Material Design Library. So it is a publicly available design library, and the main intention is that whosoever is designing Android-based applications should strive for consistency, and when it comes to consistency, they can look into the most widely used interaction styles and interface controls within the Android platform. Okay. So that is why we have, as you can see, this is fairly a detailed design style guide. We have a lot of emphasis on how the interactive product looks and feel, and then we have a lot of emphasis on, rather an equal emphasis on, how does it behave. So within look and feel, you have so many of these very specific and detailed style guides. Let me read out few of them. So material design, styles and themes, adaptive icons, buttons, check boxes, radio buttons, spinners, tool tips. Then within notifications, another set of content, and then control the system UI visibility. So basically, as you can see, the style guide is a document, publicly available document with very specific and detailed description of different interaction styles and interface controls to be used by a very particular system or by a particular application or group of applications. So Android is a particular platform which only develops Android-based applications. So for this platform, following is the design style guide. Okay. The another example is every company which is into the user interface design business has a style guide. Once again, we have before us the human interface guidelines from Apple, and it is meant for developers and designers who would like to develop iPhone platform based applications. So not just visual design, but also about controls, user interaction, system capabilities, a lot of description, very specific and detailed description of interface styles and user interface controls. Once again, you have an example in front of you. Let us move to IBM. Even IBM has a design language. They call it, the style guide is titled as IBM Design Language. I would encourage you to visit these style guides in your spare time. And then the Microsoft design guidelines. And not just the companies which are focused onto products. Even corporations which are around multimedia production and consumption, media production and consumption, they also tend towards detailing a specific style guide. So for example, the BBC has global experience language, and here is a public URL for global experience language, www.bbc.co.uk/gel/. Okay, so this is also one publicly available style guide for developers and designers. Now, can you imagine what is the most apparent advantage of having a style guide? Now, since you have seen different examples ranging from IBM to Microsoft to other corporations to BBC, can you imagine the most apparent advantage of having a style guide? The most apparent advantage is consistency. Okay, all the applications who follow the style guide stay consistent in their interaction styles and user interface controls. Not only do they stay consistent, it is also easy for any incoming designer or novice designer or trainees to come and start designing the application. So they can come on board, follow the style guide and start designing different interactive applications. So it helps these corporations to plug and play different resources when needed. Now there is another style guide. Remember the two types. The first one was commercial style guide. Now we have customized style guide. So in the customized style guide, the source for collecting different conventions and rules might be many. Okay, So it's an amalgamation of different design principles, guidelines, and rules and standards to suit a specific context of use. Okay, so that is why there is often a need to customize the design guidelines. So for example, imagine that you have to design a laptop to be used under the most rigorous conditions of weather, environment, and usage. At that time, you have to adopt the existing style guide to suit the newer environment, which is a challenge in itself. At those times, the customized style guides gets formed. So it is an amalgamation of different design principles, guidelines, standards, and rules. It is highly influenced by the user needs and requirements and by the context of use. It is adopted to include consistency across the designs and to help improve the usability of the design. It offers an informed manner of designing the interactive product. For anyone who is new to the team, if he had access to a style sheet or a style guide, that is always an added advantage. Now comes the design principles. These are design concepts and rules and conventions. Often we can call them laws also, guidelines and general design considerations. Now their sources may differ. They may come from psychology, they may come from management, or they may come from cognitive sciences, but these are broader design considerations which become useful for designers while they design interactive products. So it's a cross-disciplinary knowledge applicable to design. Once again, the source of knowledge may be from behavioral psychology, human perception, cognitive science, engineering, management, or any other discipline. It's a cross-disciplinary knowledge. And follow until you have a good reason to differ. So if you are a designer, not just you should be aware of design standards and style guidelines, but these very broad design principles one should also be aware of. And you should have good enough reasons to not follow them. Okay? So often we say in a design school, first you learn the principle, master it, and then if you find a good enough reason to differ following it, you do that. Okay? So follow until you have a good enough reason to differ. Now the first design principle, there are like so many of these design principles, I am going to tell few before you. Now the first design principle is simplicity, which is design interface and interactions as simple as possible. As a designer, you should consider providing instructions and information in user's own language so that there is a clarity of communication. Use actions, icons, words, and user interface controls which users understand naturally. And if there are complex tasks, if there is a complex process or a task, you break that complex task into manageable chunks, into manageable steps. Okay? So in that manner, there is a possibility that the interactive artifacts becomes simpler to use. Keep the appearance and the behavior of interactive product which users understand naturally. Okay? And then remove unnecessary complexity. Provide clear prompting and feedback for all the actions. The second design principle is structure. Organize meaningfully the data and functional elements. So once again, you had to find groups and hierarchies within the data and functional elements. So in that sense, structuring the information into the meaningful chunks becomes an important part of the design activity. So structure meaningfully the data and functional elements, and this is one example which we had seen earlier. As you can see on your screen, all the data elements and functional elements, they are structured in categories which are meaningful in nature. So if you were to perform a certain set of functions on a file, all those functions are arranged under a meaningful category which is titled as file itself. If you were to perform different editing operations on the file, all those functions, all those operations have been clubbed or grouped together into a meaningful category called edit. And then in the next example, as you can see, all the functional elements which are about aligning different objects on the screen, they are grouped together as a category called align. So these are different examples where we have an explicit structuring done by the designer. Okay. So that is where structure is a very important design principle. Now distinguish elements while you are structuring, you need to distinguish elements which users consider unrelated or separate from each other. So you can club elements which seem to be related, while at the same time elements which seem to be unrelated, you can keep them separate or perfectly distinguishable from each other. And when you are trying to do that, how you are creating these groups, or rather contents within a category, and then categories which are easily distinguishable from each other, how you are doing that? You are doing that with an intention to reflect users' understanding of the domain and the task, okay, and their expectations about the interactive artifact, how it should behave and appear. So you need to strive to reflect users' understanding of the domain and their expectations about how the artifact should appear or behave. One important design activity or a technique which is utilized by the designers is chunking. Here what happens that many units of information, they are combined to form a limited number of units, or what we call chunks, so that the chunked information becomes manageable, that the users can process it better, and it helps users remember. So chunking is a technique which helps while you are structuring different elements in your design. It is based on the number of units which the short-term memory can hold and process. So our human memory is divided into long-term memory and short-term memory. There is a limit of our short-term memory. Chunking as a design activity is influenced by the capacity of the short-term memory. Human beings have two different memories, long-term memory and the short-term memory. And our short-term memory is fairly limited. It is limited to the number of 4 plus minus 1 items at any given point of time. So while you are chunking, you create chunks which are manageable and easy to process by the human beings, which means that you take into account the limits of the short-term memory. And especially when users are required to recall and retain the information, it is important to chunk the information. Can you imagine your interactions with an IVR, interactive voice response system? Or let me give you an example. While you are interacting over phone with your bank, at that time to complete a task like transferring a particular amount to a registered payee, we need to retain and recall the information. In those kind of tasks, so do exercise chunking when there is a need for that. The next design principle is consistency. Uniformity in appearance, placement and behavior of data and functional elements. So the example in front of you is a set of applications which belong to a particular suite of application. Okay. So this is MS Office suite of applications, and all the applications, not just their icons, but if you can imagine how you were interacting with all of them, you can see that almost all the different interaction styles and user interface controls are fairly consistent. And by this time, can you imagine why that was happening? Because of style guides, commercial style guides given by a particular company or an organization. So style guides help attaining consistency. Do you remember seeing so many different petrol pumps while you are on a ride in a city or on a highway? Don't you think that they all look consistent? So even the company, which is a petroleum company, is striving to be consistent in its design. In a similar way, if you are designing interactive product, consistency is the least which is required. Major concern while striving for products with good usability. Consistency is a major concern while you are thinking that your interactive product should have a good usability. It must be consistent with other designs. Users expect some reasonable degree of consistency while performing tasks. So if that consistency is absent, usability gets compromised because users get confused. And it helps making your design more predictable and understandable. So if users can predict what's coming next, it brings lesser anxiety in their minds while they are interacting with the interactive artifact. Designing with the help of style guides. Once again, mention of style guide is coming with reference to consistency, and consistency is critical for applications belonging to a designed environment. Think of your operating system as a design environment. All the different applications which run on your operating systems need to be consistent in some way. Otherwise, not just the usability of the individual applications, but the usability of the entire platform or the entire operating system would get compromised. So it is very critical when you are thinking about applications which are hosted on a common platform or on a common technology. Consistency, once again, is the least which is required. The other design principle is of tolerance, which means that as an interaction designer, you design to minimize user errors. Think about the errors resulting from poor task or domain knowledge. If your users, let's say in a domain like banking, aren't aware of how to perform banking operations, that insufficient knowledge with respect to banking operations may instill some errors while they are performing interactions with the banking applications. So insufficient knowledge with respect to domain or task may bring errors while interaction, and your design should avoid such errors. In case of users, let's say if users have anyways committed errors, your design should have mechanism for letting users recover from their errors. So recoverability is another aspect which is closely linked with tolerance, and it is about how easy is it for users to recover from their errors. So there are two different ways you can incorporate recoverability in your design. There is a forward error recovery, which is that you accept the error, the system that you design accept the error, and then it helps the users to accomplish their goal by providing them an alternate route. So in this particular, if you can imagine, while you are designing a forward error recovery system, categorization and different workflows that you are designing for users to accomplish their goals, those workflows become very, very critical. Maybe there is a need to incorporate some redundancy in those workflows, because if a user commits an error, the system needs to give user an alternate path to accomplish his or her goal. And then we have the backward error recovery, which is that you undo the error committed in the previous interaction to return to an earlier state. So if you can imagine that backward error recovery as a method has influenced one interaction pattern which we had spoken about in one of our earlier sessions, and that interaction pattern was multi-level undo interaction pattern. Okay. So here in the backward error recovery, you undo the error which was committed in the previous interaction and to return to the earlier state of the system. So these are two different methods which you can use as a designer to incorporate recoverability in your interactive product. Now comes the most talked about design principle, which is accessibility. Now make products stay usable for people with different abilities. Now why accessibility is becoming so relevant as a design principle? Because in today's time, not just the people who are trained to use technology, but there are a lot of them from all walks of life who are coming and using the technology. Okay. So it is imperative for an interaction designer to also think about them, to think about people with different abilities. So the mandate of an interaction designer is to make product or to design an interactive product which stays usable for people with diverse abilities. Accessibility without special adaptation or modification. So you should design an interactive product which doesn't need too much of adaptability or too much of changes in terms of modifications for making it to be available, for making it to be usable by another set of users. So it starts with the design consideration guidelines for differently abled users. So accessibility as a design principle, it is started by looking at people who were differently abled, but now it is broadly understood as everyone, to include people from all walks of life with different abilities, with diverse abilities. So constant focus for ISO design standards. In most of the ISO design standards, accessibility is coming across as a major focus. There are 4 characteristics of accessible design. The first one is perceptibility. So as an interaction designer, you should ask the question, can the design be perceived by all the users irrespective of their sensorial abilities? So all of us as human beings have different sensorial abilities. Some of us have better eyesight than others, while others can hear better than a few others. So there is a diverse range of sensorial abilities that as human beings we all possess. So any interactive product that you design, you must raise this question, that is it perceivable by all the users with different sensorial abilities. Use redundancy in interface design. Same information is often communicated over multiple channels. So what you see is also something what you hear. So you pass on the same information on 2 different channels, and that is like bringing redundancy into the interface design. So how do you bring the perceptibility, uniform perceptibility for all different users? You do it by bringing some redundancy in the information design. For example, what do we mean by redundancy? We mean that the same information is conveyed on 2 different channels. That is one way of doing that. Or the same information is conveyed parallelly in 2 different ways. So in this example, when you can see the icon and also read the title of the icon, you are actually going through a redundant information. And also you can think about multimodal interfaces where the same information is present on 2 different channels. So for example, there would be interface category where you can see and you can hear. So the same information is passed on to the visual channel as well as the oral channel. So think in terms of multimodal interactions. Use position controls and information to help both the users who are standing or who are seated in perceiving the user interface. The second characteristic of accessible design is simplicity, something that we have already gone through as a design principle. And the question that we are asking as an interface designer is the following. Does the design offer an ease to understood and an ease to use to all the product, to all the users irrespective of their abilities, experience, formal level of education, etc. So you must go through the design principle where we have spoken in detail about simplicity. But as a characteristic of accessible design, simplicity is one major characteristic. The third characteristic is forgiveness, also known as tolerance. Does the design help users commit lesser errors or recover from their errors in an easy manner? Okay, so this is also something that we have understood earlier and we would skip it this time. Progressive disclosure is the another design principle. Display only the necessary or requested information at any given point of time. Help preventing information overload Information is divided across several layers, and only the relevant information is presented before the users. So you see that the PowerPoint presentation is a progressive disclosure of information, where only the information which is relevant at any given point of time is disclosed to the users. You can use the same technique while you are designing an interface. An interface also can be based on progressive disclosure technique. And when you are designing to show most relevant data and functional elements, you can have an example like this. So click here to view more. So there are often the times when for novice users we don't want to overload them with a lot of information. So we hide some information which may be relevant in a different context in a different container. And then we say that if you want to view this set of information, you click here. And that is one example of progressive disclosure. So interface with progressive disclosure remains clean and uncluttered. So if you are presenting only the relevant information at any given point of time, as a designer you can maintain a clean and uncluttered screen. It helps user focus on their goals while interacting with the interface. Okay, and it essentially improves their experience of interacting with the interface. It helps learning interface features and functionality, offers an undistracted road to become an expert. So if as a novice you approach an interactive product where the progressive disclosure as a technique is used by the designer, then it is easy for you as a novice user to become an expert. So it helps learning interface features and functionality, offers or undistracted road to become an expert. And it is again critical when the task involve too many complex steps. The other design principle is recognition rather than recall. It is seen, we know that users are better at recognizing previously experienced things than recalling the same. Because the recognition task provide memory cues for searching through the memory. And these memory cues could be about the origin, context or relevance of different things that you have experienced. So it is important to design interfaces which employ recognition rather than recall. How you can do that? You can do that by minimizing representations of data and functional elements based on recall. So elements which put a load on your memory, once again remember that users short-term memory, all of us as human beings have limited short-term memory. So you have to minimize representation of data and functional elements which are memory dependent, minimize that, and provide readily accessible menus, context assistance and make options clearly visible. So you might have seen in most of the applications that we use, when it comes to opening the file, there is a functionality that says open recent. That is about not asking users to recall the last file that they have experienced, but showing them in front of you a set of last opened files. So this is an example of recognition over recall technique. Now there could be several other guidelines which would be of interest to you, and I would encourage you to go through these guidelines in your spare time. I will read few of them. Aesthetic usability effect, Savannah preference, closure, common fate, confirmation, control, Fitts law, 5 hat racks, flexibility usability trade-off, Hicks law, inverted pyramid, legibility, mapping, performance load and proximity, and the list goes on. So it is open for you to explore the discipline here, and I wish you best of all. Thank you.